Unconditional Love. Yeah, right. Yet at the end of the day, what we're going to really realize is that all of us, at any given time, are struggling between the forces that we have all kinds of names for. We have a lot of ways of describing it from a Torah perspective, from a scientific perspective, every one of us from a personal perspective. We have so many different words and descriptions for this. At the end of the day, though, it boils down to two. And that is empowered. Excuse me. My hand runs faster than my brain sometimes. Or disempowered. Okay? Every one of us at any given time is telling ourselves a story. And we're either telling ourselves an empowering story or we're telling ourselves a disempowering story. If we tell ourselves an empowering story, we become empowered. If we tell ourselves a disempowering story, we become disempowered. If we tell someone else an empowering story, we empower them. When we tell someone else a disempowering story, we disempower them. And this information is going to be very important moving forward, because ultimately this is where we're headed. In our relationships, we're telling ourselves a story and we're telling others a story. And it's very important for us to know if the story that we're telling ourselves or others is an empowering story or a disempowering story. I'm hearing that some of the sound is... Okay, John? Is it better now? Let me know if there's an issue with the sound, okay? And Chaim over here will take care of it. As always, before we get really rolling, I want to thank my partner in crime, Chaim Roth. I want to thank everybody who has been promoting us. I want to thank everybody who joins. And I want to thank everybody who invites someone to join or shares this information or this content with others, in order that as many people as possible should be able to appreciate this and enjoy this. Okay, for those of you just joining, welcome. You're not latecomers. You're perfectly on time for what you came here to get. Just ask yourself why you came, why that's important for you, and hopefully we will be able to deliver that for you. So the first thing we mentioned is that there's empowered or empowering states, and there's a disempowered or disempowering state. And that at the end of the day, getting caught up a little here in my wires. At the end of the day, really what we're choosing between, when we talk about bechira, when we talk about choice, if we set our targets that we're trying to hit as empowering or disempowering, what are we going to choose? Are we going to choose the disempowering stories, the disempowering outcomes, or are we choosing the empowering? In order to get to empowered, which story do you need to tell or hear? The empowered or the disempowered story? Let's see if I can make that video better. Okay? So here's how this works, okay? In relationships, now we've spoken about this many times, that the reason that relationships are so important is because there are three primary life events that we do not have the capacity of knowing its true value without a comparative, without relating it to something else. So whether it's time, right? Not that we can't, we have that capacity. We have an internal capacity that's amazing. And one day we definitely will have to have a session and talk specifically about that. But most of us are living in time, either in time, between time, or through time, which is another topic in and of itself. But our relationship to time is very comparative. If we take away the sun and the moon and the light and the dark and any other outside external information, we have no way of knowing what time it is, right? So you can hold on to a thought of what time it is for a few minutes, but after a while, you'll forget if it's day or night, you'll forget what time of the day it is, you'll forget which day of the week it is, day, month. We lose our sense of time unless we have something to relate it to. Does that make sense? The second thing that we have a hard time figuring out is where we are. without any externals, one basement might be just like any other basement. One place in the world might be just like any, but if I know if it's hot or if it's cold or the trees or the style or the birds, if I have some kind of external information, I can use that information to figure out where in the world I am. Yet without that, where am I? Which takes us to the third and the topic that we're going to discuss today. And that is, who am I? And I'm going to start with the simple ones, the shallow ones. And yet it goes much, much deeper. Am I fat or am I skinny? Am I tall or am I short? Am I smart or am I not? Am I rich or am I poor? How do I know? Well, it depends who I compare it to. If I compare myself to the richest person in the world, then no matter how much money I have, I'm poor. If I compare myself to the poorest person in the world, no matter how little I have, I'm rich. So who am I really? Well, it depends in relation to what, in relation to who. And this is why relationships are so integral, such an integral part of our existence, such an integral part of our journey on this thing that we call life. So let's explore that for a moment, being that it is so important to us because that's where we take our value from. That's where we figure out, who am I? And believe it or not, although it may or may not become simple to realize, recognize, and understand as I go through this next step, but at the end of the day, if you think about it, and if you know anybody who has difficult relationships or you've ever been in a difficult relationship where you are, believe it or not, it's very possible that aside from all the other things that we're going to talk about today and moving forward, it's very possible that it is your lack of self-esteem that is a black hole in the relationship. See, we spoke about last week that when we go into relationships, and especially the relationship we call marriage, on some level, somewhere in our consciousness, it's in order to be misakin, it's in order to relieve, to heal the feelings of abandonment that we experienced as a child. And without going all crazy on it and without turning it into a whole monster, just on a simple level. When we were born initially, we thought that we were the center of the universe, and it felt that way. Because everything we needed was right there. Before we even knew we needed it, they were already doing it for us. They were feeding us, they were pampering us, they were holding us, hugging us, taking care of us. If we cried, if we felt any feeling of need at all, and we just made some kind of sound or gurgle or whatnot, they were like 15 people or hands or fingers ready to, or resources ready to take care of me, ready to give me whatever I needed. And then slowly, with time, I begin to realize that I'm not, well, not me, of course, you, but I'm not the center of the universe. And that feeling sucks. It really, really is a painful feeling to come to realization that, hey, I thought I'm the center of the universe and I realized that I'm not. And that realization causes pain, and that pain goes along with us for life. And very often that pain translates in our minds to a sense of being abandoned. Because there was a time that I cried and they didn't come running. So I cried louder and they still didn't come running. They finally came and they were so busy on their phones, or they were so busy laughing, smiling, or with the new baby, or with something else, some good thing, some not so good. And they ignored me. How dare they? I'm the center of the universe. Right? So we begin to develop this feeling that everyone abandons me. Right? And then you have the teacher that you love in first grade or kindergarten, and the next year they put you into some other grade and you feel abandoned again. Or there's the friend that you had last year that was in your class, and now this year he or she is in the other class, or maybe they moved to a different country, or they moved down the block, or whatever it might be. And we continuously layer upon layer these feelings of being abandoned by the people that are important to me, by the people that I love. And then finally, one day, I find the person who is going to make me the center of the world again, the center of the universe. So I marry him or her. And as much as I need that, they need that. So how is this going to work? As long as we're two different parts, both needing the same resources, which makes it seem as if that resource or those resources are limited. How can I get what I need? And now I'm really starting to worry. Because if I can't find relief from my feelings of abandonment in my marriage, and again, most of us don't have these words to say it. We usually say it as he or she doesn't understand me, or he or she doesn't accept me, or he or she doesn't serve me the way I needed or expected it or whatnot. Those are the words we use to describe our pain from not receiving from this relationship that which we, again, subconsciously assumed is going to naturally happen. And the reason that we hit that level of disappointment very often, they tell a joke that a Kala once came to her mother after Sheva Brachos was over, and she says, it's not fair. The mother says, what's not fair? What's wrong? She says, Bobby married Zaidi, right? Says, yeah. She says, you married Tati. She says, yeah. He says, and I had to marry a stranger? That's not fair. So yeah, we marry a stranger, and there are expectations built in. And the question is, how can we, in fact, heal, not just find relief, but truly heal from this relationship called marriage, which very often, if not always, is the single most important relationship in our lives, that if we can get that right, we feel like we can get the others right as well. Even though by now, those of us who have been following us knows that the first relationship that we have is with ourselves. And we're going to talk about how to do that and how that works. But first, what I would like to start with is this thing that we call love. I would like to explore it for just a moment, okay? So l'chayr, we can all agree. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, this really is interactive. Go ahead. If you have a question, anything that you didn't understand or that I said that you want to understand more of, you want to hear more about, let me know. In the meantime, I will continue. Okay? So here's the question. The question is, if marriage is something that I enter in order to be healed from a pain that I've had for so long, it sounds like marriage is a hospital. And you don't want to end up in the ICU. So I'm not saying that this is what should be. I'm not saying that that's what the intended result, the intended outcome of marriage should be. And yet, marriage is described as something that makes us whole. Right? We call it shulam bayis, not tumim bayis. Tumim is something that's whole. It's never broken. Shulam is what we make peace between parts that can clash. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to find what's the process that's going to make this work. Why hasn't it worked when it hasn't? Why has it worked when it does? And how can we harness that, especially since we really do need each other in this world in order to fulfill our needs and to be there for us and to support us and to be one with us in order for us to go through this journey of life the best way possible. So how can we empower one another? And by the way, anyone who thinks that this information is exclusively for marriage is mistaken. Because the information that we're about to discuss is important to know in every relationship, because at the end of the day, ask yourselves the following question. And I will ask, if you could please just throw up your personal answer up on the screen. You can type it in however it works for you. Out of all the needs, out of all the emotions that we seek in all of our relationships, and especially in the relationship called marriage, what is the single most important feeling or emotion that we're looking for? Go ahead. I can sort of see the screen. If Chaim helps me out over here. Go ahead. What is the single most important emotion that you come into marriage that you want to achieve, that you want to feel? Okay? At least someone got it right. Right? So how would you describe that? What's the word for that? What's the word? What are we all looking for when we go into a relationship with a spouse? What's the single most important feeling or emotion that we're trying to experience. And based on, I see some of your answers, and there you go. Now you're talking, of course, okay? So the feeling or emotion that we're looking for the most when we talk about marriage or emotion or relationships is love, right? No matter who you are, if you're big or small, a man or a woman, adult or child, every relationship that we're in, every relationship that we rely on, every relationship that we seek to fill us up with everything that we need, what we seek is love. Okay? And if whether you're a man or a woman, doesn't make a difference. We're all looking for love. Now here's the thing. What kind of love are you looking for? Are you looking for love with conditions or without conditions? Can't hear you. I need to see someone type something for me to know what your answer is. Exactly. That's right. Yep, you got it. We're looking for unconditional love. Right? We're looking for love of the unconditional variety. Right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for love without conditions. And I hate to break it to you. Everything in life has boundaries. Everything in life has conditions. And by the time we're done, I will hopefully be able to discuss with you the one condition that has a condition. That's the minimum when it comes to love. Okay? Because there is no such thing as no conditions. Everything in the world has conditions. And before I continue, I'll suggest to you the two. It's one condition that has a condition, which is the minimum for us to be able to be in a loving relationship with someone, a relationship where we love someone. Now, I don't want this to get in the way of anything else I'm going to say, so I'll come back to the minimal conditions in a moment. But first, let me talk to you about fear. Okay? Because fear is the second emotion. It's the opposite emotion of love that we avoid. As much as we need and we seek and we chase love, on the negative side, that's how much we avoid and we fear fear. Okay? So on the positive, we're looking for love. That's our pleasure that we chase, and we're all chasing that. With everything we got, we're chasing love. Right? And then we're doing everything we can to avoid anything that is going to scare us. Although, if you think about it, in the amusement park, which ride has the longest line? I don't know these days, but in regular times. Which ride has the longest line? The scariest one. So we have this love-hate relationship with fear, and yet we chase love, we avoid fear like the plague. There's a gentleman by the name of Tony Robbins who says the following. He says that every human being on earth, every person, and if you want, you can go test this scientifically. I can just tell you experientially, and from the amount of times that I've repeated this and how people react to it, that it works, at least in order to relay the message that I would like to. He says that every human being on earth suffers from a fear that has two parts. Part number one is the fear that I won't be something enough, rich enough, smart enough, popular enough, successful enough, whatever it is, tall enough, skinny enough. We're all worried that there's something I won't be enough of. And part number two of the fear is, and therefore, I won't be what? If I won't be enough, what am I afraid I'm going to lose? What won't I be enough of? What won't I get? If I won't be enough, I'm afraid that I won't be loved. Now, this fear is a fear that's shared by, according to Tony Robbins, every human being on earth. From presidents to kings to peasants, men, women, children, adults, young, and everything in between. We all are afraid that we won't be enough of whatever it is, or many things, And then therefore we won't be loved. And without love, we cannot exist, because that is our single most important target, emotional target, is to experience love, which is interesting that I'll just throw this in quickly, that in order to experience the same level of love, you can love or be loved. And that's where it becomes complicated, yet it becomes extremely simple once you know that little tidbit, which you can learn, you can use further in the process, literally as a tip and a trick to get whatever you need in that category. Okay, but we'll get to that. So for now, let's ask ourselves just a very interesting, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but this fear that we won't be enough and therefore we won't be loved can either paralyze you to the point where you just can't get your head off the pillow in the morning to get out of bed, to get your day rolling, to get started. Or this same fear of not being, whatever it is, enough, and therefore not being loved, can motivate you to get you to jump out of bed in the morning and go do whatever you want, you need to do in order to be enough and be loved. So sometimes it motivates me in order to be enough of whatever I have to be enough of in order to be loved on the level that I want to be loved or experience love. And sometimes it can paralyze, where you're so afraid that you won't be enough and that you're going to lose the love that you're afraid to even move. You're afraid to do anything that would, God forbid, cause you to lose that little bit of love you actually have, or whatever amount it is. Make sense so far? If it makes sense, pick up your hand, show me you're listening, show me you see me, show me you hear me. Guys, hello, anybody out there? Hooah, okay, very good, thank you very much. A little bit of feedback, I don't see your faces, so at least I see some kind of movement. It helps a lot. Thank you so much. Okay, so here's how this works. Love, unconditional, I wish. Conditions. Okay, so we established that we're going to have at least one condition that has a condition, but there's got to be some kind of condition. The fear that I won't be enough and therefore I won't be loved can either motivate or paralyze. And I remember for a long time after I learned this, and I studied it, and I applied it, and I talked about it, and I used it as a tool with myself, obviously always first in my own relationships, and then sharing it with friends and others, I began to really try to understand when, under what parameters, when does this fear of not being enough and therefore not being loved, when does this fear motivate and when does this fear paralyze? And then one day, my daughter got married, one of my daughters. And the day of the wedding, as I was preparing to go to the wedding, I guess a different headspace, a different state, and it dawned on me. When this fear paralyzes and when this fear motivates. And that is as follows. When the conditions of the love are clear, not ke'ili unconditional, but really there are conditions. But when they really are clear, whatever the conditions are, and you're allowed to have conditions. Conditions are part of life. I know that most people would like to believe that they love their children unconditionally. Although we've heard plenty of stories where people, unfortunately, at some point, due to whatever it was, decided that their children are no longer their children, or they sat shiva on their children. So obviously there are conditions. So what I would like to suggest is that as long as those conditions are murky and not clear, then the fear of not being enough and therefore not being loved paralyzes us. It doesn't allow us to even do anything because we're always afraid that maybe we're going to lose something. And that scares us. That really, really scares us. Yet, when the conditions are clear, at that moment, this fear of not being enough and therefore not being loved means I'm going to lose the love is extremely motivating. And it gets us out of bed in the morning. It gets us to go take risks. It allows us to be able, because the fear of not being enough now is driven to be enough and to keep the love and get more love without being afraid because I know the conditions. The conditions are clear. So what I would like to suggest is that, by the way, does anyone have any questions up to here? Please let me know. Pick up your hand or ask a question or type it in. Okay, then I will continue. Okay, great. So here's the condition that has a condition. The first condition, the main condition, the condition that in my humble opinion, every single relationship where the word love is being used, whether it's, and I'm going to really go shallow here, whether it's your car, whether it's another human being, whether it's your job, whether it's whatever it is, your child, your grandchild, your neighbors, whoever you love, your house, your chair, your money, your wife, is the condition is that it has to be yours. That's the first condition that every single relationship that includes love has to have. Not only because that's what's in the relationship and that's for you and that's, besides all of that, if you love anything that's not yours, that's creepy. That's like sachmoy. That's like sisava. You're not supposed to love other people's things. You're only supposed to love your own things. So yes, in order for me to love something, the first condition has to be that it's mine in order for me not to be a creep. Not that I'm not, but in order for me to not come across as one. Okay, I have to love my children, my wife, my Einigla. Right? That's fine, that's beautiful, that's wonderful. I love my car, I have to love my job, I have to love my experience, my life. If I love someone else's, any of those, that's not a good thing. Okay, so that has to be a condition in love. And that condition has a condition. Fortunately or unfortunately, whether you agree or not, I'm sorry, not whether you agree or not, but whether it's easily acceptable or not, is that we all have a red line. That no matter how much I love you, if you cross that red line, I have to disown you. It's not that I won't love you anymore, it's that I have to disown you, and therefore you're not mine. And if you're not mine, we lost the initial condition. That's why I call it a condition for the condition. So this condition is so important that we should know what it is. And no, we don't want to sit around and think about all the nasty things that people can do. And if someone I love does this, I will stop loving them. That's not the goal here. The goal here, though, is to be clear with myself so that I can convey it to the other person. What's your condition? What is it that if I do that, I will no longer be yours? After you establish that it's yours, by the way. If it's your wife, if it's your child, if it's your friend, if it's your business, if it's your car, no matter what happens to it, you will be willing to do whatever it takes to fix it, to make sure it works, to help it, to heal it, right? Because it's mine. Anything that's mine, if my finger gets a bang, I don't ignore my finger. I can ignore the other 7 billion fingers in the world if they get bumped and hurt, right? That's maybe why when it was, I don't know if it was some Oyabach or Barry Levine, one of them, they tell a story that he went to the doctor and he said, Unsere Fuß tut weh. Our foot is hurting us. Right? Because that's the fusion. It was his wife, and he felt it so strongly that it hurt him. It became our foot. But that's step number one. Step number one is you have to be mine. If you're not mine, then loving you is creepy. Loving you is not a healthy thing, not a good thing. Loving you is a separator and not a connector. Yet if it's mine, then yes, sure, I can love anything that's mine, and it's healthy, and it's good, and that's what it should be, and that's what it needs, and that's what I need. And yet we have to be true to ourselves, that mine, that ownership, you're my wife, unless God forbid there's a red line. And again, you got to know your red line. And your red line can be something small, your red line can be something big. That's up to you, but you have to know it. You have to be clear about it, and you have to be able to communicate it to the other person, obviously, under appropriate circumstances. In order that when they experience their fear of not being enough, whatever the enough is, and therefore not being loved, it'll be clear to them exactly what they have to be enough of and how enough they have to be in order for you to continue to consider them yours and therefore to continue to love them. And that's empowering. That's extremely empowering, to be clear with yourself and therefore communicate that to others about exactly what your standards are, what you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to accept. That honesty, that self-honesty is so important. And yet, going back to what I said earlier, if your self-esteem is such that you don't even know what your standards are, you don't even know what you expect, what you want, because you're still suffering from your own pain of abandonment, how can you choose and convey to your spouse or to your child or to your partner or to your friend, to your boss or to your worker, what the standard is that in order for you to continue to consider them your boss, your worker, your partner, your wife, your child, and obviously children is a whole different category. We're not in any way suggesting that we should ever go in that direction. Yeah, we have to be honest with ourselves that if there is a red line, we have to either be clear about it or we have to clean it out in ourselves. We have to figure that out. And if you want, you can watch the webinar on rules if you want to figure out how to revisit those rules, rewrite some rules and see if they work for you or not. Okay? So here's the thing. If you've been having difficult relationships in the past, regardless of whether it's because this was not known to you or you didn't know how to use it or you weren't clear about it or others weren't clear with you, there's something that's very important that we need to know when it comes to relationships. And I believe that we will continue with this topic at least for one more week moving forward. And I would like to suggest that next week, I'm going to start with a Q&A. So if any of you have questions or if you know anyone who has questions about these topics that we're talking about, feel free to send in those questions using the link either that you got the link to join today from, or whoever invited you, work your way back and figure out a way to get through to us and send us those questions, or we will give you some time right when we start next week for a little Q&A for a few minutes before I move on to next week's topic. Okay? You know, we all talk about the chip on the shoulder. Oh, you have a chip on your shoulder. And it's something that we've been hearing ever since we've been teenagers, I guess, or maybe younger. And it dawned on me that the chip on the shoulder metaphor is actually a good metaphor. Because if we use it, then yes, we all do have a metaphorical chip on our shoulder. And there's a few things that I would like to talk about that chip when we talk about Camp Must. And those of you who know what I mean will appreciate that. I believe that metaphor can be used as follows. Imagine if you have a chip on your shoulder and the person that you're in a relationship with, and all of us all have a chip on their shoulder. Every time that two chips that have previously been in close proximity and already have connected through Bluetooth or whatever the technology you want to call it is, every time that they come into proximity, they reconnect immediately. Just like you go into your car with your phone and you have your music playing, and then you get out of your car and the music stops and the phone stops the music player, and then you do whatever you do and you come back into your car, and then when you sit in, you turn on the car and the Bluetooth works. Where does the music start? Or does it just continue from the last place that it was playing? Unless you changed it in between. But if you did nothing, you just got out of the car, did some shopping, and came back into the car, most cars, most phones, I believe are programmed to restart from the last place that they had contact. So here's the thing. You're in a relationship with somebody, and you go to a coach, you go to a counselor, you go to a therapist, you go to a Rav, wherever you do, you're trying, you're changing, you're doing whatever you can to make the relationship better. And yet, for some reason, every time the two of you get together, boom, you just continue whatever's been going on until now. I want to blame the chip. Because the chip, your chip and their chip, comes to close proximity, and when it reconnects, it just reconnects in the last place that we connected. It just keeps playing that song. So if the last place we connected was pleasant and fun and enjoyable and loving, then we reconnect from that space. If, on the other hand, chas v'shalom, if we reconnect after having been in a negative, disempowering state, then we automatically reconnect in that disempowered state, whether it was a fight, an argument, a misunderstanding, hurt, pain, shame, whatever it was, that's where we initially reconnect until we do something in order to shift that connection. And that's very often why people are stuck in a loop in a relationship, and they're getting all this new knowledge and they're trying all these new things, and for some reason the relationship keeps on returning to its old patterns. And the reason for that is because the chips have not been, reprogrammed in between coming into close proximity. In order for you and your partner, whether that partner is a spouse, a child, a workmate, or any other type of relationship, in order for any of this information to have positive impact on you moving forward, one of the things that we need to learn how to do is how to reprogram my own chip. How can I be in a situation, and let's go negative for a second, although we're not looking to be negative. I'm in a negative state with my partner. And again, I use the word partner broadly, not chas v'shalom the way many others might use that word or term. I just mean it partner because it could sometimes be a spouse, it could sometimes be a child, it could be a workmate, it could be a friend. There are many different situations where this information is just the same. Okay, even though obviously the marital relationship has that deep and high level of needs that we all have and carry around. Because that's going to hopefully heal our pain of abandonment. Right? So reprogramming the chip is such an important part and parcel of whatever it is you're doing. So even if you're going for marriage counseling for the longest time where you just started, whatever they're teaching you, whatever they're training you, if it doesn't include somehow reprogramming your own chip, then you may struggle with that, no matter how good the advice is, no matter how great the information is. Yet if you don't reprogram your chip, then the next time your chip, and the other person is not reprogramming their chip specifically, then the next time the two of you come into proximity, boom, the chips are going to connect, and they're going to reconnect exactly where they connected the last time without asking anybody. So how do you reprogram your chip? I'm not going to go deep into that right now because I really want to stay focused on what we spoke about till now, but I will discuss briefly this thing that we call state control, okay? Because at the end of the day, there are two states. There's an empowering state and there's a disempowering state. We have many words for empowering states, which is happy, grateful, joyful, calm, relaxed, right? We have so many names for the disempowered states, such as angry, worry, anxiety, depression, jealousy. These are all disempowered states. And by the way, if we're talking about states, we may as well just for a moment pause and ask ourselves the following question. When we talk about emotions, we talk about positive emotions and negative emotions. I don't know what country or what culture you come from, but the cultures that I'm used to, excuse me, include this type of language: a positive emotion, negative emotion. And we all know that positive, by definition, means adds to. Excuse me. And we know that negative means depletes. So what are some positive emotions? We just mentioned a few, right? Because empowering states, disempowering states, positive emotions and negative emotions share a lot of terminology, right? So a positive emotion would be joy, happy, glad, safe, right? That's important, positive emotion. Certain, okay? Strong, those are positive emotions. Negative emotions: jealousy, anger, depression, anxiety, anxious, worry, right? Those are negative emotions. So when we refer to them as positive and negative, what are these adding and what are these depleting? Excuse me. I would like to suggest that what we are basically is we are energy that's vibrating at a specific frequency. And everything in the Bria is some type of energy that's vibrating at a different frequency. So solids vibrate obviously at a much lower frequency than steam. Steam vibrates at is energy vibrating at a much higher frequency, right? So when we experience something, what we're saying is that it's either adding to my energy, it's filling me up with energy, or it's depleting my energy. You ever notice that on the way to a holiday, as they call it out in England, Chofesh in Israel, or vacation here in America, on your way out, you carry 3 suitcases in this hand and 2 suitcases in that hand, and you throw it up to the car and throw it into the trunk, and no problem, up and down the steps, and you're good to go. On the way home, and even if you lost half of your clothing and you left it somewhere, and you schlep up 1 suitcase, you can hardly get up the steps. What's up with that? Why? Because on the way out, we're experiencing a positive emotion, hope, anticipation, joy. We're excited. We're looking forward to the vacation, to the holiday, to the chofesh. So we're filled with energy. Positive energy fills us up with energy. Positive emotions fills us up with energy. Empowering is empowering. And yet on the way back, we're already thinking, tomorrow I got to go back to work, back to the regular day, blah, blah, blah. We did have a good time. We didn't have a good time. Negative emotion. Depletion of energy. No strength. Disempowered. So what would you rather be? Empowered or disempowered? What would you rather deliver to your partner? Empowered or disempowered? And yet we keep on telling ourselves and others disempowering stories. And disempowering stories often, if not always, begin with a disempowering question. Why did that happen? Why did you do that? How can you do such a thing? And we say it to ourselves and we say it to others, and then we wonder why everyone around us, including ourselves, feel disempowered and depleted of energy most of the time. Why so many people are suffering from so many forms of disempowerment and weakness and pain and suffering. Yet here's the thing. We get to create the state that we're in by making a tiny little shift. And it's something that I've spoken about here. I talk about it all the time. It's probably one of the most simple things in the world for a person to do. Yet you got to do it in order for it to work. It's not enough to know it. And you definitely don't want to try. Because try means I'll try, and if it works, I'll keep trying. And if it doesn't work, I'll stop trying. Yet in order to succeed at anything, you need 3 things. You need desire. It's chayshik. Anything you do without chayshik, that's what it looks like. You need knowledge, because otherwise you'll keep doing over and over the same thing, expecting different results, like the idiot that Albert Einstein talks about. So you need knowledge. You need to know that whatever you're going to practice over and over is the right thing, so that you can keep on practicing. And that's the third thing. You have to practice over and over and over. I believe it was Aristotle that said that repetition is the mother of all learning, of all skill. It's all about repetition. So if you want to, and you learn how to, and then you just go out and practice it, you'll get good at it. It'll start out the first few times, you learned how to tie your shoes, loop over loop over loop, pull, loop over loop. And then eventually today, if you try to even think about it, you'll have to redo it again, looking away, just letting your fingers do the walking. Okay? So at first, this may seem a little bit challenging, yet this is probably the single most important skill that every one of us needs to be able to immediately implement. And that is to train our brain to think about what we do want and not what we don't want. Whenever we're doing something, whatever it is we're doing, if we're focusing on what we want, if we tell people what we want, if we tell the universe what we want, if we come tell Hashem what we want, instead of complaining about all the things that we don't want, we raise the chances of getting what we want exponentially. So if you're disappointed, if you found yourself in the past disappointed, not achieving the things that you want, blaming others, complaining about others, ending up with excuses instead of results the way you want them, make this tiny switch today. Begin by telling yourself, continue that by sharing it with others. Train yourself to say, think, text, write, talk about, discuss what you do want and not what you don't want. And in its simplest form, all it says is, if you're hungry, instead of talking about hungry, talk about food. If you're thirsty, instead of talking about how thirsty you are, talk about what you want to drink. If you're tired, instead of complaining about how tired you are, talk about how rested you'd like to be. If you're sad, talk about how happy you want to be. If you're disappointed, talk about how excited you want to be to anticipate whatever it is that you're looking forward to. Make this tiny switch, because making this tiny switch will make it easier for you moving forward to be clear with yourself and therefore others what exactly it is that you need from the relationship in order for you to perform at your best so that you can give them what they need in the relationship. Just this tiny little change in your life can affect so much. We talk about everything we don't want. We complain all day. We're constantly telling our partner what they did that we didn't like. Is that empowering or disempowering? Yet how about if we could come to them and say, listen, whatever was, whatever it is. Moving forward, I was wondering if maybe you could do it this way. How much better, worse, or the same would that be in your relationship? If instead of complaining, oh, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, and you're always doing this wrong, oh my goodness, and you're telling them all these disempowering stories, and you're telling yourself a disempowering story, they're never there for me, and they're not there for me on the level I need them to be there for me, etc., etc., etc. We all know our internal stories that we've been telling ourselves all these years. If we could switch that to what we do want, I want them to be there for me. I need you to be there for me. I need you to be more present when you're talking to me. I need you to put your phone down when you're walking out. I need you to put more salt in the whatever it is you need. Because if it's not important enough for you to tell them what you need, it's not important enough for them to deliver it, for you to have Thomas on them, but they didn't. So let's accept this tiny little change moving forward. In the next few days, until the next time we meet, or forever, whenever you think of something that you don't want, whenever you write something that you don't want, whenever you think something that you don't want, just shift it to what you do want. Now, it happens to be that in Mastermind, we have a workshop, and in that workshop, one of the key uniquenesses of the workshop is that we track emotions, we track our time, we track all kinds of things. And what we've learned is that anything that you track becomes affected. Because the fact is that anything that we focus on, anything that we notice, grows. Whatever you're focusing on, that's what you're going to get more of. Unfortunately, most people spend most of their time focusing on all the pain in their life and all the things that they don't want, and guess what they experience? Guess where they live? Just more pain and more of what they don't want. Yet if you can formulate what you do want, there's a possibility that you could join us in a mastermind workshop and begin to record what you do want and begin to track that using the funnel that we've created in order to help you go from what you do want to actually getting it. Because as Tony Robbins says, where focus goes, energy flows. So anything that you want, if you're focusing on it, you're giving it energy to grow. You're giving it what it needs to thrive. And everything in the Bria has a need to survive, whether it's positive or negative. So if you want more of something, then just think about, focus on, and do some of that. Talk about that and see what happens. We have still so much to talk about, but I think that I'll give you guys a moment or two to ask any questions you might have, and if you don't, we'll call it a day, and hopefully we'll see you back here next week. Bring along some friends. Share the link of the replay with whoever you think might benefit from it. And always feel free to reach out to us, to ask us any questions you have. And as I said, next week, we're going to start with a Q&A. So come early, bring along your questions, bring along some friends, and we will continue on this journey towards better relationships and a better experience in everything in life. With the help of Hashem.